Hello and welcome to another episode of Exportal TV. Today we are broadcasting from Warsaw. We have a special guest. It's a political philosopher and writer from Vienna, Austria, Alexander Markovics. Alexander, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Bartosz.
This is your first time in Warsaw, I heard.
Exactly, it's my first time. Yeah.
Yesterday we were sightseeing. What are your impressions?
Yeah, so controversially, I think that Warsaw is a very beautiful Eastern European city.
Mm-hmm.
It has this Eurasian flair, and not only because of the Eurasian sparrows you can see everywhere, but because of its vastness, its I would say imperial character. You can definitely see inside the city. And what I also think is very positively is that when you are looking at the common Polish people, you don't see this individualist nature mostly, like you can see it in more Western European cities like Berlin or like Vienna, unfortunately. And yeah, I also admire highly the patriotism you can see everywhere in Poland, and I think this is something very special and positive, that you still have in Poland this sense of collective identity, of belonging to one people, which is a thing you could not see in a thoroughly liberalized and westernized city like Berlin, Vienna, or Rome are, unfortunately, today.
Yeah, but let's stop for a minute with one very important word used. You said that Warsaw is like a typical, or maybe not typical, but you have this vibe of Eastern European city. Eastern, because in Poland you probably triggered many of our viewers. Because, in Poland we have a very strong feeling that we are something different than the West, of course. Yeah. The West is completely different. As you mentioned, the more individualist, more liberal, without Christian faith already, the Christianized. But on the other hand, we have a strong. Unique feeling that we are not also a Eastern European nation. That East is something which begins somewhere near Minsk, Kiev, somewhere there, and way back to Moscow. And I think that it is interesting that you also mentioned Vienna as a Western European city, because this feeling I've mentioned is also not only exclusive for Polish borders, but we see that our region, let's say region between Baltic Sea, Adriatic Sea, and the Black Sea, is a different, you can say, civilization, that our nations have a lot more in common in this region than, let's say, with the East or with the West. And you, as a political philosopher from Vienna, how do you see it? Why do you think that Austria is already this more Western part than our Central Europe or Central Eastern Europe, as Poles want to see it? And one more question. There is, of course, everybody heard about it, this 3 Seas initiative, which is exactly integrating this region I mentioned, and Austria is a part of the initiative. So what are your feelings, your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so of course you've mentioned that Vienna is also often counted not as a Western European city, but as an Eastern European city. And I think if you are historical speaking, it's definitely correct.
Yeah, it's Österreich.
Yeah, Österreich, the empire in the East. Yeah, definitely. I mean, at least until the 70s and 80s, when globalization also hit Austria very hard. And nowadays we have the problem that unlike Poland, for example, Austria is a country which is in terms of ideology and also in terms of culture already part of Western Europe, in the sense that it internalized this Western ideology, also of modernity, not only by the elites, but also by a vast majority of the people. But of course, if you look at the history of Vienna, if you look at its potential, and also if you look at the common cultural similarities, we have not only with Poland, but also with countries like Croatia, also for example with Serbia to a certain degree. We are not traditionally a part of this Western Europe, and therefore you can see that there is also a different possibility, that Austria becomes a different part of Europe. And I think this is also important when we talk about the potential of the Free Sea initiative or of the idea of Intermarium, that it actually would make possible that these parts of Europe, like Poland, like Austria, like Croatia, Hungary, and other countries you would more identify with the East and less with the West, that they have actually the potential to assert a certain task inside of Europe due to this initiative to create somehow their own space. So you have this idea of heartland, for example, which was preeminent in geopolitics since Mackinder. And of course the idea of heartland went through different phases. Like for example, Carl Schmitt stated in his ideas on land and sea that it's actually preeminent if Europe wants to defend its sovereignty, that it has to identify itself with land power and to fight against sea power. So sea power was identified by him with globalization, with free international trade, with the destruction of rooted identities, with the destruction of religious traditions, and land power, on the other hand, was the conservation of identities, the idea of rootedness. So you have on the one hand this idea of fluidity, which is also, for example, taken up by the postmodernist philosopher Zygmunt Bauman, who wrote about it in defense of it. And then you have on the other hand this idea of rootedness. And of course, if we look at a country like Poland, which tries to uphold its national identity, to defend its tradition, its religion, then I think this idea of land power is very important. And I think that is maybe then also the task of Poland to show other countries like Austria, who are highly westernized, that there is also the possibility to follow a different path in geopolitics. And therefore I think the real potential of Intermarium and the Free Seas initiative is actually not in being some kind of other crystallization point or focus of globalization besides Germany and its idea of the European Union. So in the sense of let's create another European Union but with Poland in the center and follow the same policies and the same orders from Washington and Brussels. But I think that the Intermarium and the Free Seas initiative has the very potential to, on the one hand, allow Poland to defend its own identity, but not only to defend it, but also, for example, to allow countries like Austria to regain a perspective to its own roots, to reevaluate its own history, and redirect it in the direction of land power. So I don't think that the main goal of the Free Seas initiative should be to become a bulwark of the coastal zones in the terms of Spikeman against the heartland of Eurasia, but that we can view the Intermarium as a part of the whole heartland, but in the sense that there is not only one heartland, one homeland, but there are different kinds of it.
Yes, it's the conception of Alexander Dugin. We've talked with him in Moscow. By the way, of course, establishment loves us for interviews with Dugin, especially after the war. And yes, it was very important to mention that the Dugin from the 90s is not the Dugin today, because in the 90s there was a very famous interview of Dugin in Fronda magazine, where he said that in the new world order, new Eurasian world order, Poland has to be participated between Russia and Germany, or destroyed in some other way, but there is no place for Poland in any shape. But after many years, of course, it's favorite interview of all the Dugin's enemies in Poland. But it's good to remember that Dugin, it was like 2 years ago, gave me an interview about updated position of Poland in the Eurasian order, in his ideas. He proposes a conception of small heartlands, and proposing the Intermarium conception with Poland in centrum to be one of those little heartlands. And what do you think about this conception? Is it even possible to make Eurasia from Portugal to Vladivostok, which is centralized, or maybe this Dugin's conception when it comes to logics of his ideas is better?
Yeah, so I think you have on the one hand this very centralized and Jacobean imagination of a centralized European state from Lisbon to Vladivostok, which was spearheaded by Jean Firia already in the 60s. I think when we talk about such conceptions, we can, for example, also look at the European Union, which is basically nothing else than this conception, but on a smaller scale, and with a different ideology, with liberalism.
Yeah.
And I think, as we can see today, it doesn't fit the diversity and the different cultures of the various European peoples. Of course, you can say you have strong nations like Germany and like France, who have a certain weight. Also, if you look at history from the days of Charlemagne until today. But as said before, there is also a reason why you have bigger nations like, for example, Poland, who also have their own cultural identity and who don't want to be integrated in some kind of super Germany or super France and lose all its sovereignty. And therefore I think this idea of various small heartlands is very good, because it allows the different parts of Europe to remain their specific abilities, their specific cultures, and integrates them in different ways. So of course, for example, if you look at Poland, you have this history of the Jagiellonian Empire. You also have the history of Austro-Hungary, for example, and also to a certain degree of the Holy Roman Empire. So you have different cultural spaces which these territories and these people living there have been part of. And I think if you want to create not a bulwark against Eurasia, but something like an intermediary zone between the western parts of Europe and Eurasia as such, it's much better to use this concept of various small heartlands out of the differentiated heartlands, so that, for example, also smaller countries like Austria, like Hungary, or like Croatia can bring in their historical experiences, their culture, in order to make a peaceful coexistence between these peoples possible on the one hand, and also a cultural exchange. And if you look at these people, they often have, for example, historic figures and personalities who managed to build a bridge, for example, between Europe and Eurasia, precisely because they have not been part of a very powerful country, or because they had a certain diplomatic and historical tradition. For example, you had Sigmund von Herberstein, who lived in the 15th century, and he was famous for being the first European who went to Moscow after the end of the Pax Mongolica.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting, for example, about von Herberstein was that he was originally from the southern part of Styria, which is nowadays a part of Slovenia, and he didn't only speak German, but also an ancient form of Slovenian. And back then, the Slavic languages, for example, had been more similar to each other than they are now today. And so he was able to also understand back in those days a lot of Russian, and get a different impression, for example, of the Russians under Ivan Grozny than other European counterparts who followed him afterwards. And I think this is very interesting when we talk about the communication between different cultural spaces, but because in order to really understand them, of course, you have to concern yourself with the culture of the other, and also to respect another culture as another culture, and let's not say in the typical Western tradition, okay, you're different, therefore we either have to kill you or to assimilate you. There's no different outcome possible. And yeah, exactly, if you look at how, for example, also Poland is treated today by the European Union, you can see that this pathologic view on the other is still active. In Brussels, Poland is only allowed either to follow the orders from Brussels, to participate in liberalism, in atheism, in the whole LGBT cult, or if they're not, they have to pay penalties to the European Union because they don't enact a certain LGBT law.
The money was frozen, right?
Things. Yeah, exactly. And I think that therefore it's necessary to enact this idea of different heartlands, because Europe, as neither Jean Firia nor the current leading elites like Ursula von der Leyen have understood, Europe is not a unitary state with one culture, with one kind of laws, and with only one way of seeing the world. But Europe as such is a very diverse civilization and a diverse culture, and I think we should respect these differences in order to be able to continue this European civilization, which always had different peoples inside it, not only Germanic and Romanic people, but also Slavic people, for example. And if this Europe wants to exist further in a multipolar world order, which is currently materializing, I think we also have to respect these differences inside Europe and return to this idea of the differentiated heartlands and smaller heartlands. And of course, Intermarium, I think, has a huge potential in that regard, that it can make the people of Eastern Europe and also in a certain sense of Central Europe participate in this initiative in order also to defend their own identities against this idea that Western Europe is the only role model and the only way to exist as a European. And yeah, therefore I think it can become a very important and interesting concept for the future, because also the Polish people and the Austrian people have a long imperial tradition, also like for example the Hungarians and others. And I think it would be horrible if we simply try to erase these identities and this historical consciousness we have, instead of using it for the future multipolar world we will live in.
Yeah. Alexander, thank you for your visit. I hope that you like our interview. If you did, please subscribe. And for today, it's all. Alexander, thank you once again.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Bartosz.